Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Curious Neuron podcast. My name is Cindy, and I am your host. I am so happy that we have Jessica Lahey here today, author of The Gift of Failure. I had the absolute pleasure of meeting her a couple months ago in Abu Dhabi, very far away, even though we
Yep.
live not too far away. We met on the other side, and I was first blown away by your talk, Jessica, and then truly, after reading your book, you shifted the way that I'm seeing so many things in my home. And so I'm really excited to dig into this. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. That's like all I could ever ask for, and especially when we're talking about gift of failure stuff, which is that we do the best we can with the information that we have. And then if we find out how to do better or do differently, we say, you know what? I apologize. I'm going to move forward now with better information. And that's like what we try to model for our kids. So it's great.
And that was one thing I really appreciated. We got a bit of an understanding of how you kind of came together with your husband and said, like, we need to talk about this, right?
Yeah.
I'd love for our listeners to understand a little bit more about how did the idea for the book come from? You are a teacher and you speak about the classroom. And then how did you kind of bring this into your home?
So I have taught every grade from 6th grade to 12th grade. I happen to love middle school, just that's where my heart lies. And have two kids myself. They're 5 years apart. And when I was teaching middle school and starting to get irritated with the parents of my students for doing too much for their kids and making it so that like there were no consequences for things that the kids did wrong, or learning moments were getting sort of stolen right out from under them because the parents would rescue them. And I was getting irritated with those parents, which is a nightmare. I mean, teachers know that the research is pretty clear that when the homeschool relationship is good, that more learning happens. So my
Right.
being peeved at the parents of my students, that's a bad place to be. Then, just about the point where I was like really getting upset, I found out that my 9-year-old daughter could not tie her own shoes. And that was a moment where I was like, oh, wait a second.
Mm.
This, I'm implicated in this too. And all sorts of things started to pop up for me. And I had a lot of questions, some research. There's been lots of research done on human motivation, and there's been some research done on sort of how extrinsic motivators and versus intrinsic motivators work in schools. But I hadn't seen it sort of all in one place. And I was really worried that like over parenting and using too many carrot and sticks extrinsic motivators for kids was not just messing with their motivation, but it was actually messing with their learning. So I got to spend a couple years researching this, and I was just so grateful to have the opportunity to like go deep into the research and then produce a book that really looks at all angles of that problem.
It really does. I mean, you talk about from young kids and teenagers, and I think that it really is a beautiful guide for a parent to keep coming back to. Something as simple as rethinking when we're at the park, and you talk
Yeah,
about this and kind of stepping in. I've done it. I've been in that
of
situation
course.
where it's like and it's okay. Like you said at the beginning, we're gonna catch yourself in these moments, and I think what you're doing is just bringing awareness to how we're interacting and parenting with your child, and sort of the question that I've been asking myself now in my home is, am I taking away a learning opportunity, or am I taking away a moment that
Yeah.
they can do something on their own? So I just keep asking myself that. And it's really, like I said, given me a different lens for what I'm doing with my kids. It comes from a good place.
Yeah, I think I do a couple things now that I didn't used to do. Number one is the question I'm constantly asking. And keep in mind, my kids were 9 and 14 when I wrote this book. They're now 21 and 26. And one's in college, one's in graduate school. And I still have to stop and say, wait, 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 wait. Do I want my kid to do it perfectly now? And by perfectly, I have to, full disclosure, sometimes I just mean like the way I want it done.
Yeah.
Or do I want them to be able to do it themselves next
Mm,
time? And
mm.
the answer to that question is, of course, I want them to, especially since I don't have time left to be, hoping and praying that I'm getting them ready for adulthood because they're adults. But, and then the other thing is that, when we are constantly conveying the message that it's not okay for them to screw things up, then they don't believe us when we tell them that, oh, sweetie, it's okay if you make a mistake or you fail at this thing, because what I care about is that you learn from this experience, because right now they do not believe us. And I spend most of my time in schools, I just came back yesterday from talking to a bunch of middle schoolers. They do not believe us when we say that what we care about is that you learn from this mistake. And they do not believe us when we say that, the point is the learning. They know that what we really mean is, yeah, but I really need for you to get A's. And there are some other things going on as well, but that's sort of really where the crux of the problem lies at the moment.
With the grades and also with the sports. So I posted about your one of your quotes in your book. It was a title for a section, and I think it really resonated with people because I've just been hearing so much about parents talking about how intense sports are becoming.
Hmm.
And the question you had raised in your book is, are you doing this for? Well, I forgot how you worded it, but it's not for it's you're doing it for yourself. Maybe it's
Right.
because you didn't get to a level that you wanted and you're pushing your child, but whether it's sports or grades, I really do think that we're saying mistakes are good, but we're not really showing them that, and they feel it.
Yeah.
They see the difference.
I actually have the best book recommendation for that. And I sort of wish this book the book that I'm going to recommend is called Raising Empowered Athletes. And it's by a woman named Kirsten Jones. And she came to one of my early events for the Gift of Failure and said, she's an NCAA Hall of Fame athlete herself and parent of athletes. And she's like, I really want to write this book except for, parents of athletes. And I was said, oh my gosh, yes, please write that book because we need it so badly because we need kids who are empowered, who can speak up for themselves, who can make decisions about whether or not this is something that they want to do long term or if this is something they're just trying out. I have friends right now whose kids are deciding whether or not their college choices are going to include trying to play in college or not. And, these are really hard questions. And our wants and needs and desires and hopes and
Mm.
dreams tend to get really wrapped up with our kids, as do our assessments of how we're doing as parents. And I think that's the biggest trap that we tend to fall into, is looking to our kids for some sort of any kind of feedback or validation
Mm.
on how we're doing as parents. And I certainly fall into that trap all the time.
You had alluded to that too in your book, right? And I really resonated with this, where when we are taking over and doing something for a child and we're making them happy, we feel like we are being a good parent. We feel like it just feels good, right? Like
Right.
everything is okay. You made a mess. I'll clean it up. Don't worry about it, or whatever it is. But then in the end, we forget that we're also at the same time complaining that we have too much on our plates and that our
Yeah.
children don't do anything and they're not independent, and look at their room and they're not packing their school bags on their own. I posted about this today just to kind of warm up to our conversation, and I think it was at 46% of parents said that they pack their kids' school
Yeah.
bags.
Yeah. Well, and they have all kinds of great reasons. I'll pack more healthy food, da da da. There's all kinds. We can pull all kinds of reasons out, but the other problem is not just that we're not giving them the ability to build the skills that we need them to build. We're also inadvertently telling them that we don't think they're competent enough for them to do it. We're not letting them do it because we don't think they can handle it, even if we're not saying it that way. The other big problem, and to weave in sort of a whole separate discussion, is this idea of competence, of giving kids skills, allowing them to achieve mastery over things, allowing them to achieve what we call in the biz a sense of self efficacy. That's one of the biggest, most protective elements against substance use disorder. And my second book is about preventing substance use in kids. I'm in recovery myself. I'm an alcoholic, and I have two kids who are genetically predisposed for substance use disorder. So, this middle part, this like making sure that kids have actual skills and competence moving into adulthood, is like that is it's one of the things I spend most of my time trying to convince people to do, to let their kids develop skills and not just feel optimistic about the idea that they might be able to do something. That
Right.
optimism is great, but that they have actual skills that
Yeah.
can't be taken away from them.
And that's what I've had so many of these conversations with parents. So my specialty is emotion regulation skills, and I tell
Hmm.
parents they are skills. And so when
Yeah.
parents are really frustrated with their child because they're having really big emotions and they don't know how to cope with anger, or they don't know how to cope with frustration, and they get mad, right? They get disciplined for doing whatever they did or saying whatever they said. I tell them, but this is a skill they need to develop and they need to practice it just like any other skill. And so you want to see those moments when they lose control, because that's when, as a parent, you step in and say, well, the next time this happens, you could, I could see that you were frustrated and so on. Right. So
Right.
it's the same thing with what you're saying. I think that we get really easily frustrated as parents, but we forget to step back and say, okay, what is it that my child is trying to do? They're trying to learn how to pack their school bag. Maybe they don't have the executive function skills, and you allude to that as well. You talk about the cognitive skills. The executive functions are so important for many of these things. And whenever I tell parents, like, did you help them with executive function skills, they're like, no, what is that? So I think there's still a lot for us to learn about as parents in terms of what we can give our children as skills, or help them.
The
Yeah.
thing that surprised one of the things that surprised me the most was Wendy Grolnick's research. She's at Clark University, and she did this really cool research that sort of underpins the sort of the ideas you were just discussing. And part of that has to do with her. She did this research around, she gave kids a somewhat challenging task, a mother-child pairs, a somewhat challenging task for the kids, and then coded the behavior to see, how the parents handled it. And some of the parents were what we call autonomy supportive parents, where they allowed the kid to do the task the way they wanted to do it, and in what order, and how, all that sort of stuff. And then some of the parents were highly controlling or directive around the task. And the key takeaway is that when she reran this, when she had the parents come back to the lab, she separated the kids from the parents, because knowing what type of parent they were, she wanted to see how capable kids were of being able to complete challenging tasks that were intended to frustrate them a little bit, because she wanted to see how the kids would manage that feeling of frustration. Um, and what was fascinating is that the kids who had the autonomy supportive parents, almost all of them completed the task successfully, whereas the kids who had the really directive or controlling parents, they didn't complete, they were not able to complete the task. And I say over and over and over again, as a teacher, this scares me to death, because some of the most powerful teaching tools I have, one of them is called desirable difficulties. And desirable difficulties are tasks that are somewhat difficult to parse in the short term, like on the front end. And yet, if a kid can stick with it, if the kid can stick with the task, they will learn more deeply in the short term and more durably over the long term. So let's think about this. Who can benefit from this incredibly powerful teaching tool? It's not kids who are going to give up because they don't know how to feel that frustration and be okay with it. And in my classroom, it looks like, the kid who I hand something out and they're like, hand shoots up in the air and they're like, Mrs. Leahy, Miss Leahy, Miss Leahy, help, 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 before they've even read the instructions or thought about it, or, given themselves a moment to sort of say, okay, no, I can do this. And when you talked about, our natural desire to like do for our kids and make them happy, part of what we're doing, to be honest, is just wanting to alleviate that frustration. We hate seeing our kids like going, I can't do it. It's too hard. I'm so stupid. I don't want to see that in my kids or in my students. So I just want to fix it. I just want to fix it. And so I do it for them, and thereby remove the learning opportunity and underline this sort of, that's okay. I don't think you're, capable of doing it yourself. So it's a whole bunch of stuff that gets all tangled up and in the end just messes with learning.
Speaking of wanting to keep our child kind of happy, I posted also, I asked in my stories how many parents, like, if a child had forgotten about a project or they're doing it at the last minute and it's the night before, 2 hours past their bedtime, would the parent just do it for them and let them go to bed? Would the parent help them so that it's done more quickly? Would they just let them not do it or complete it, and the consequences, the grade? There were some that said that. I forget the percentage, but again, it was over 40% that said they would do it with the child to make sure that it gets
Yeah.
done. And
Yeah.
about 10 or 15% said they would do it for them, tell them to go to bed, and then do it for them so that it's complete and they get their grades. And I was thinking about your example in the book, that it was just a wonderful example, when your child forgot their assignment at home, or their and I really put myself in your shoes and I was like, what is she going to do?
Yeah, the context is so important there, because people hear about this and think that my point of view is that you should never, ever take your kid anything that they've ever forgotten or left
Mm,
at home. And it's not quite complete. So my daughter was specifically having problems remembering to put her homework in her backpack and take it to school. At first, we thought she wasn't doing her homework, but we had a conversation and found out no, she was doing her homework. She just wasn't turning it in. So I have a kid that I know has a specific problem with putting her homework in her backpack and taking it to school. And then I find out that she's left it on the table and she's outside at the bus stop and the bus is coming. And the school is like right down the street from my house. And I had to go there anyway later in the day. And I knew I couldn't take it to her because, I mean, yes, it would have saved her. Yes, the teacher wouldn't have gotten mad at her. She was starting to get teased for being like, oh, that kid that forgets everything. Like, I want to fix
Hmm,
all of that.
of course.
And I didn't take it. And, someone challenged me online about it. I put something about Facebook on it and I talk about that in the book. But in the end, the way that that ended up playing out, which isn't fully in the book because it took lots of time. Sometimes these aren't things that you can find an answer to really, really quickly. Sometimes you see the results way down the road. So that day, the teacher kept her in. And I have thanked the teacher for this many times for finally saying, like, look, this is a problem. You got to come up with a solution. You got to come up with a solution today. What's your solution going to be? And that day, my daughter, as if she had invented the concept of the checklist, was like, a checklist. This is it. It's magic. I've invented this. Clearly, it's my thing. And what was fascinating about it is she continues to this day. Actually, I can't say it's to this day because I don't know what she's doing in her dorm room, but until 2 years ago, continued to make checklists. From fourth grade all the way through the end of high school, used a checklist every single morning. And it started like the very first ones were like, get dressed, little things like that.
Hmm.
But they always finish with brush teeth and, go out to bus or car or whatever. And I watched her brush her teeth while looking at the checklist that was on our refrigerator every day. And if I had taken the homework, if the teacher hadn't taken her to task that day, if the teacher hadn't done some problem solving with her, that problem would have gone on for much longer, until, those neurons started talking to each other in the upper part of her brain and her executive function skills, but in the meantime, it's our job to help them come up with strategies to support them until that part of the brain comes online. It wasn't online for her yet, but that doesn't mean she's excused from it. It just means she's got to come up with better strategies.
I just think it's such a good example for us to kind of, again, like you said, it's not every time and it's not like, right. I guess just that one story, people can take it out of context, but I think it's a good reminder of thinking about every moment. Is this a good teaching moment? Is this a moment that will support my child and get the point across? Yesterday I was giving a workshop to some teachers, and I was speaking with them, and they said that the biggest problem they have with these high school students is that they come in after lunch. It's a thing, apparently. I don't know. After lunch with no books, no pencil, nothing in their hands, knowing that they have a class. And then they start asking, oh, I need to go get my pencil. I need to go get my book. Oh, I didn't bring this. I didn't bring that. And teachers were telling me how frustrated they were. And so I told the teachers to read your book because I just said, can we let them fail? Like, how do you strategically say, like, well, today you don't learn?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, actually, it's funny you say that because often what will happen is I'll do a talk at a school and the school administrator, the principal or a superintendent will say, okay, how do we support parents going forward? If we're saying to them that we care about more than just your kid's grades. We care that your kid, can problem solve and come up with strategies, and we'll be here to help them do that. I say, great, that sounds fantastic. What you do is you send out an email to your school community saying that we care more about your kids' grades. We care that they learn how to problem solve and become competent and manage their life and their resources and all these things. So to that end, starting tomorrow, there will be no more delivering forgotten items to school after first bell. And what's nice about that is that it's not like the parent saying, no, I won't bring it to you. And it's not, so the kid can't get mad at the parent. But it also, and then the school, usually the secretary usually has to deal with like these tables full of stuff accumulating in the front lobby. But also, let's think about it from an equity perspective. Who can deliver stuff to school like in the middle of the morning? It's certainly not someone who uses public transportation or does shift work. So if you're thinking about, your whole community and what's equitable for your whole community and showing the kids and the parents that you really do care about the kids and will be there to help problem solve with them and you'll help them work through the issues. No, you can't bring forgotten things to school anymore. And we'll
Yeah.
help them if it's their
Hmm.
lunch, if it's a homework, whatever, we will help them problem solve around
Right.
that. But this
So
is a whole community thing now.
of course, but the students are not even, it's not even about a parent bringing it in, it's that they're leaving everything in
Yeah.
their lockers. So
Right.
I think
Well,
even
and
more
same
of an
sort of message
opportunity.
though.
Right.
Right,
Yeah.
but the same sort of message. I mean, if
Yeah.
that's the message to the school community, then the teacher can say, you know, that thing we said. And by the way, the other nice thing is as an advisor, it was sort of my job to help kids, you know, problem solve how to use their plan book to figure out which things to take. Like, oh, okay, if you go to your locker at this point in the day, you need to get your things for your next 3 classes so that you don't have to go back. All that sort of stuff. That's what teachers and like that's what we do. We're not
Right.
just there to teach the Krebs cycle. We're there
Right.
to like help them with all of that other stuff too.
Yeah. I want to get back to that because I want to ask you at some point about how a parent can go about it, scaffolding this, because it's not just that it's magically going to happen.
Right, right.
But before we get there, I'm curious to know during your research for your book, this overparenting thing that is happening so much right now that we hear about all the time. Did you see like a growth of it, an appearance of it at some point through your research? What do you think is the difference between? I mean, I'm thinking about how I was raised and there wasn't that much overparenting and you kind of left a little bit on your own. There were strict rules, not the same as today. What happened?
So there's a whole, I love doing the history part. So like in the addiction inoculation, I got to do a great like history of, you know, addictive substances and the, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
In this book, you know, it really came down to like, we're having fewer children. We're having them later after having been in the workforce longer, having gotten more education. We're using the tools that we acquired for work or whatever. And if that's a spreadsheet or whatever that thing is, we're also used to getting report cards or short term, you know, reports on our performance. And, you know, I joke in the book that for a while I wasn't working when I had my first kid. I was lucky enough to get some time off. I was in graduate school at the time and I wanted grades. I wanted someone to give me feedback on how my parenting was doing because it was like a big vacuum of information. And I get these little growth charts and I'm like, woohoo, the head
Right.
is at
Yes.
whatever percent, you know, all that stuff. But after that, you know, we just don't get a lot of feedback and we tend to default to our kids and their performance as our feedback. And, you know, I did it a lot when my kids were really little, but by the time, you know, I'd done the research for this book and I'd done some personal growth, by the time they went off to look at colleges, I told my oldest kid I wanted some small symbolic act that would convey a lot of information, a lot of meaning around that. And I said, you know, the one thing I will not do, I will not put a sticker indicating where you're going to college. It's a common thing in the US for people to put stickers of where their kids are in college, like parent of a whatever
Yes.
student or just the college logo. I said, you know, this decision that you make about where you're going to become an adult is too important for me to get to brag about it in a park in the high school parking lot. This is about you and where you're going to become an adult. So it was just a dumb little symbolic act for me to say that, you know, this isn't about me. This is about you. And I don't get to like, you know, take my feedback on my parenting based on your SAT scores and where you got into a college, that kind of thing.
I love that you did that because I do think that, again, the parents I'm around, friends and family, it's like the better the grades are, that's what people
Yeah.
are talking about. That my
Yeah.
child's the best at this, and we forget about just the regular conversation. We don't have to talk about achievements, like it's okay, and it puts pressure on the child too.
Well, and they hear it
Of
and
course,
they're hearing it. And what they get from that is, unfortunately, what students tell me all the time is that they are fairly sure that their parents love them more when they get high grades and less when they get low grades. Because what they're seeing us do is heap the praise on only when they're getting it right the first time and not when they work through a challenge and maybe get it right the third time. That's not, we don't tend to really focus on the process. We tend to really focus on the end product. And that's unfortunate because then again, they don't believe us when we say, that's okay if you screw this up. What I care about is that you're learning from the experience.
Right. I really appreciate that part of your research kind of brought that to light, because I do think that I think I would add with the parents that I've been working with, we have a scale inside Kirsten where we have them do the parental competence scale, and it's really interesting because 40% of parents usually score low, and so perhaps there's also a link to that in terms of. But it's a feeling of competence. I don't think I have the skills to parent my child. There's a big emphasis on emotions right now, and many parents are not raised learning how to regulate emotions. So part of my theory is, that perhaps they don't know how to show up with warmth and sensitivity, knowing that that's important, but they never received that, and so it's difficult. But it makes a lot of sense that the achievements are somewhere or a space where they can say, I'm succeeding at parenting. I don't know how to show up with warmth and sensitivity, but my kid's doing well in school. So it would kind of make sense, right? Because it's again that confidence piece, and that's not easy. So it makes sense.
Well, I think also sometimes we're doing praise that is sort of a double-edged thing where we're like giving them praise, but it's for the things that we want from them and not necessarily for the things they want for themselves or things that are based on bigger goals or, you know, they're watching what we do too. That's the other thing is, and then if we're not showing them that we make mistakes and we screw up and oh my God, like I talk about this a lot, that the dinner table is such a great place to talk about where we screwed up during our day and how we plan to rectify the situation or, an apology we have to make to someone or discussing what it means to have a good friend. Like, all of these things that we just sort of expect them to get, life skills stuff that we just expect them to pick up somewhere, that doesn't just magically happen. When I was talking to my kid recently about a difficult conversation I had with a friend of mine, and I wasn't being a great friend in response to the fact that I felt like she hadn't been a good friend. And that's really important part of learning how to manage relationships. And it just doesn't occur to us to have conversations about these things with our kids, but it's really important.
Yeah, yeah. We're modeling to them, right? Like how to
Yeah.
go about these situations. Can we focus a little bit more on this praise and feedback and reward? Because I do think it's something that parents struggle with. How to praise, how to give. Should I give rewards? I was talking to a teacher, and she said that in their classroom and their school, there's lots of charts, and so you do something great, you get a sticker or you get a reward.
Those don't work. They don't work. Extrinsic motivators do not work over the long term to boost motivation to do the things that we want kids to do. Not just kids, anybody. And actually, I have to say, while we're talking about them, there is one exception. It appears to the sticker chart not working thing, and that's with diaper training because we think that potty training because we think that there's something about like getting out of diapers, being a big girl, big boy underpants is like its own sort of internal motivation, but sticker charts, money for grades, the grades themselves, points,
Yeah.
scores, honors, and then like coercions, like monitoring them on their phones, checking the school portal constantly. I am never in a million years saying we can't use these things, but we have to think about them as what they are, which is extrinsic motivators, and they do not work to boost motivation over the long term. They undermine motivation over the long term. So, and I say this in the book, if you want your kids to not want to learn math, pay them for their math grades. It's really clear. This
Yeah.
is not me.
Yeah.
This is 60 years of really good research. And if you want to know more about it, read Edward Dece's Why We Do What We Do.
Ah, thank you. So then what's the option? Because I know somebody who's listening to this now is saying, okay, maybe they're a teacher. We have lots of teachers that listen. Maybe they're a parent and they're like, well, then Jessica, what should I do in my home or my classroom? Because nobody listens to me and nobody does what they have to do. What do I do?
You see, the problem is with extrinsic motivators, with things like sticker charts or things like we even have here in the US, I don't know if they use them in Canada, but there's these rewards for behavior programs, and I won't name them I'd love to not get sued, but they it's essentially like trinkets or stars and whatever in return for behavior, and those don't work either. Like essentially not only do they not work, but what we're doing is we're teaching kids to do the right thing only when someone's watching. Like essentially, if you look at like, for example, schools of character that are really working hard on their character education programs, the the ultimate goal is for kids to know the right, do the right, and then do the right thing when no one is watching. And for a lot of kids, they'd be like, well, why would I do the right thing when no one's watching? I don't get stars for that. I don't get a reward for that. So that bugs me. So yeah, essentially what we need to do, and again, this is not my research, this is Edward Dece's research, that if we want to boost intrinsic motivation, like motivation to actually do things for the sake of the thing itself, whether it's learning, practicing piano, behavioral stuff, whatever, we've got to do three things, which is give them more autonomy, and which is choice and control. Number two, help them feel more competent and not just confident. I love
Oh,
myself a confident kid.
yeah.
It's part of the formula for, we talk about the C's of resilience, and confidence is one, but competence is really important, having actual skills and mastery so that you have this feeling of self-efficacy and that kind of stuff, and connection. And if I'm having this conversation with teachers, it sounds one way. If I'm having this conversation with parents, it's really just about, are you feeling seen, heard, known, loved for who you are, and regardless of your performance, right? And the autonomy, the competence, and the connection, I would have to have a really specific example of, like, how do I get a kid to do this thing? Because you need to know what motivates the kid, what their goals are, what are the pressure points for that kid, what leverage can I use, what else are, if it's about getting them to do their math homework, like, are they interested in space, and can you talk to them about the fact that in order to be an astronaut, astronauts have to do a lot of math, and someday we'll watch this movie like Apollo 13, where they had to, when they didn't have any instruments, they had to do all this math to figure out just how much to turn this vehicle so that they could adjust their trajectory to not skip off the atmosphere. All of these kinds of things are all about knowing who your kid is, what their interests are, what their goals are, what really motivates them, giving them more choice, helping them feel competent, and then making sure they know that you support them no matter what their performance level is.
So you described the self-determination theory, which I talk a lot about,
Yeah.
the three, and I do
Trying so hard not to use
I'm
jargon. Come
sorry,
on.
but it's a good one. Our audience
Yeah.
knows it. It's fine. We're science
Okay,
based.
good. Excellent. Good.
But yeah, I think that we can do this within our home. I think it might be
Right.
harder in the classroom. So, when I was talking to this teacher, she said, "What else can we possibly do when we have so many kids in the classroom?"
Well, and think about it this way. When I'm teaching, I have to use points. I have to use scores. They're going to get grades. There's going to be an honor roll. Maybe there's going to be maybe even a class rank. They're going to have to take tests in order to go to college. Extrinsic motivators are
That's
everywhere,
true.
right?
Yeah.
So the way we do this, the way we sort of at least try to shift a little bit over, is to focus more on the process than on the end product,
Yeah.
right? So if a kid comes to you and they're like freaking out over the difference between an A minus and a B plus, if you can drag that conversation back over to, yes, but what did you understand and what did you not understand? What are you going to ask for extra help around? Did you get a good night's sleep the night before that test, or did you stay up an extra hour to review because the sleep is more effective for memory consolidation? How about, did you have good breakfast? Oh, you say your friend got an A and you got an F. Well, what did your friend do that you didn't do? What did you do that your friend didn't do? What exactly happened here? What worked that we're going to bring forward with us, and what didn't work that we're going to leave behind? That focus on process is not only important for, like, getting them to believe us when we say, yeah, what I really care about is you learn from this. It also reduces anxiety, because what you're doing is bringing the locus of control back to the kid. When we talk about praise, this is a really important aspect of that, which is we try to make our praise as general as possible and our criticisms as specific as possible. So when a kid comes home and they're like, my teacher hates me, and you can say, well, okay, well, let's talk about this a little bit. Like, why do you think your teacher hates you? And it usually comes down to, like, your kid did this thing that the teacher didn't like. And so you make it as specific as possible, because now your kid, and you can say, what is it that you could maybe do in the future that around this thing that you did that made your teacher upset with you, that maybe would prevent that in the future. Now you're bringing the locus of control back to the kid. But if they do something if they come home and they're like, my teacher really loves me today. And you say, well, what is it specifically that your teacher was
Yeah.
really loving today? And your kid is like, well, I was quiet and didn't speak out of turn and raised my hand. And you say, you see that when you are listening, you're using your listening ears and your all that sort of stuff, and make it as general as possible so that they can see, oh, I was able to control this thing and it's applicable to all these different
Hmm.
other areas of my world. So anytime we can give some locus of control back to the kids, it's going to lower their anxiety, and it's going to help them feel like they have that self-efficacy to use those skills moving forward and in other contexts.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think it's very attainable for a teacher. Right now, you're not looking at like the needs and the interests in each child, but the environment that you're building, and that's the environment that's not focusing on that one little thing. I'm sure it's so. This would probably be a conversation for another time, but the changes that would need to be done in the system itself, right? Because no matter how much that teacher is working to say it's not the grade, I really do want you. I'm seeing progress. I'm seeing that you're improving, and I'm happy with that. And the child says, but I'm still at a B minus, and that's not good enough. How, it must be so hard to kind of get them to disconnect from the grade.
Interesting you say that, because when I speak at schools and give kids my email address so that they can tell me what it is they want their parents to know. Well, the
Wow.
biggest one I get, number one, is I'm not my brother, I'm not my sister, I'm not my parents when they were my age, I'm not their do-over, that kind of thing. But another big one I get is I really am doing my best and my parents don't believe me. And what is a kid supposed to do with that? Number one, they're not feeling trusted. Number two, a kid if a kid really and truly believes that they're doing their best, then what they're missing is skills, right?
Right.
So teaching them skills, and again, that brings locus of control back, which is great. But one of the things that's been really fascinating in talking to kids about this stuff and in getting their actual thoughts on how we need to change these things, a lot of them, don't see us modeling the behavior that they're expecting.
Right.
So whether it's, I don't understand why can't have my phone and yet all the adults around me are using their phones constantly.
Yeah.
Or I don't understand why it's so important for me to, you know, do X and taking emotional risks, taking risks around intellectual risks. I had a parent once asked me to come up with a list of really difficult books to read for her kid because her kids weren't reading for pleasure. And I was like, well, that's kind of a magic list, but I will try to help you with that. But in the meantime, do your children see you read for pleasure? And she had to admit that, I work really long hours and sometimes I read on my iPad. And I had to say, well, from your kids' perspective, that doesn't really count because they can't tell what you're doing on your iPad. And also, there's no magic wand. In fact, I have magic wands on my board behind me because I say this so often. There's no magic wand I can wave that will make your kid interested in reading if they don't see that it's a priority for you. You know, they will watch what we do and do that. They're not just going to do what we say. So we have to be thinking about our modeling all the time. If, parents come to me and say, my kid just will not take she won't take the challenge problems. She won't admit when she doesn't know something. She won't stay after to get extra help. I just don't know what to do. And she's so afraid that she's going to fail at something she won't even try. It's hard, but I have to say, so what kind of patterns is she seeing from you? Like, does she see you try things that are hard for you? Does she
True.
see you? So one of the things
Yeah.
that I do with my kids and continue to do with my kids is every quarter or so, we make 3 goals for ourselves, our goals. Like they can't be my goals imposed on them,
Right.
our goals. And one of them has to be a little scary.
Mm.
And then 3 months later, we check in and we sort of ask how things went and talk about, what went well and what didn't. Because that's a safe place to screw up is
Mm.
within your own goals.
Oh,
And they have to see us, taking some intellectual and emotional risks as well.
I love that. It's such a good thing to start implementing in our homes too, and simple, right? Showing our kids that we have goals, and also the disappointment of maybe I didn't reach the goal,
Yeah.
and that's okay. How do you model that? I think that's a good segue into kind of having the conversation of where to start, because maybe a parent is listening and they have a 3-year-old and they say, "Well, it's not the right time." Whereas after reading your book, I think there's always a right time. You said you're never too young, right? And so when you said you started when your kids were a little bit older, but what did those initial steps look like in your home, and how can parents start? I would say that I would think the first step is noticing when you're stepping in, but so what would that look like for a parent?
For really little kids, I mean, never ever rip the rug out from kids and like just stop doing stuff
No.
for them. I mean,
Okay.
that's confusing
Right.
and disturbing. And yeah. So the nice thing about older kids is you can say, you know what, I realized I've been really looking at what I've been doing, and I've been nagging a lot. I've been doing a lot for you. I've been undermining your competence, undermining your ability to develop new skills, and that stops now. And let's start not with everything all at one time. You don't want to again rip the rug out from underneath them, but say, like, for example, around homework, I am constantly nagging you around homework. And that needs to stop. You're in high school now. Like, I won't even be there in a couple years when you need to remember all your stuff. So here are our expectations, our really clear expectations, and here are our very clear logical consequences, not like you don't do your homework and you lose your digital device or whatever. It's some sort of logical consequence has to do with the homework. For us, it was you have to have a conference with the teacher and with the parent where you lead it, and we help you come up with strategies. But for littler kids, it's great because you can just say something as simple as, you know what? Mommy does a lot for you. And I think you can do a lot of stuff that I didn't even realize you can do. And you should see the videos the parents send me. I got one from this guy who had a toddler and like a 5-year old. And that kid was desperate to help with laundry, but it
Oh.
was a top loading washing machine. So he couldn't really reach. And so the dad was right there, actually taking a little video for me. And the kid had figured out what he would do is he would sort of jump up and reach in and get the laundry, and he would hand it to his little toddler sister. And if he slipped and felt and couldn't get out, it was her job to grab his feet and pull on his feet. And I watched this
Oh.
toddler and this like 5-year-old essentially get the laundry from the washer into the dryer, and the 5-year-old even pretended that he slipped in so that the little sister could sort of pull on his feet to pull him down. It was the cutest thing I've ever
Oh.
seen. I have another video of a toddler loading some plastic dishes in the dishwasher, and the mom was like, yeah, I had no idea this was something she was capable of. So let them at least try to surprise you, try to show you. Cause little things start small. Take a look if you want to Google Montessori kid kitchens and watch some videos of what the theory behind Montessori kitchens and kitchen skills are. Watch those kids prepare, sometimes at first pretend food, and you know later on they're real snacks in these little, let kids try, let them at least try, and don't take over, give them support and guidance and redirection, but don't take over for them.
I want to. I if you weren't going to say it, I was going to say it. Don't take over, because I know that it's hard. Maybe the dish won't be loaded in the way that you're used to doing it. Maybe if you ask them to make their bed and they make it and everything is crooked, let it go. We have to let it go, because I've seen it with my kids as well. The more we let it go and the more proud they feel, the more they'll do it on their own, because that's the intrinsic motivation coming in. But we have to let them do it in their way, and and really have the conversation in our mind to like step back.
What's fascinating is the response I get often, which is like, oh, I'm just not comfortable with things being out of order. I'm not comfortable with like that.
Yeah.
And in fact, the most popular blog post I have ever put up still remains something I wrote for fun, just for me. My youngest, sort of all out of the blue, just sort of kind of started pretending like she didn't know how to do laundry, even though I knew full well she knew how to do laundry. So it turns out that if you have a washing machine, if you have laundry machines that are enameled, like especially if they're white, you can use dry erase marker and put instructions like all over the machine with arrows and instructions on things. So I did it really in a fun way, like, stop before you put those jeans in there, check to see if the socks are still wadded up with the underwear, and that kind of stuff. And if you Google Jessica Lahey or just Leahy and special care instructions, it was so much fun.
Mm,
Actually, an appliance manufacturer wanted to use it for a
really?
campaign because it's just this really fun way of saying to your kids, I know you can do this. And if you forget something, here's the support you need to make sure that you can do it. But you got this.
Mm.
everything, all the tools you need to be able to do it. And I have confidence in you. You can make it doesn't have to be a nagging, mean thing all the time.
Well, that's what I was gonna say, right? Like, I think that a parent that starts this tomorrow, there's going to be a learning process for the parent. There's going to be a learning process for the child. It's not going to naturally just happen because you're like, "Hey, you want to load the dishwasher?" And they're like, "No," like
Yeah.
I've never
Yeah.
done it before. They might, but they might not. And
Yeah.
so I think there's going to be a build up to that. What if a parent is really struggling?
There's also a honeymoon period where things will go well for a short period of time, then they won't. There's a book called How to Be a Happier Parent, where KJ Dell'Antonia talks very specifically about the fact that habit formation for this kind of stuff really works best if it's for an entire season. So like rotating chore charts are less effective in creating new habits in kids because it really does take a full season, like 3 months, to develop habits. So instead of rotating, have, for an entire season, certain jobs be their jobs, because it just, the more we understand about habit formation, the more we get that it's sort of a longer term process than we're used to. But sorry, I
That's a good
interrupted
reminder.
you.
No, not at all. I think that's a really good reminder that it's going to take time and some work as a family and a unit. So maybe a parent now is questioning the charts or the checklist. Does that fall within like something you're okay? That's okay. Not that you're okay with, but that works and supports them, or is it like a reward of some sort? Right? Like maybe they're questioning that.
The chart thing, what I'm talking about specifically is like kids getting a star, kids getting money,
Yeah.
kids getting a penny, kids, whatever, in
Yeah.
exchange for a thing that they need to do. First of all, speaking of chores, since we were on that, it's really important that we're not paying kids to
Yeah.
do stuff around the house. Ron Lieber also talks about this in his book, The Opposite of Spoiled, a book I love, because,
Hmm.
we do stuff around the house. We do household duties because we're part of a family. There's research that shows actually that when kids have a hand in keeping the household running, that when bad stuff happens, if someone gets sick or if there's a death in the family or whatever, that those kids actually suffer fewer or less sort of emotional distress. Because they feel like, again, we're back to locus of control, because they feel like they have a part in keeping things going. So we don't pay kids to do chores or household duties around the house. That's part of being a family. Kids get money or allowance to learn how to deal with money. But there's no problem with like having lists of things, like here's a reminder, here's who's on duty for dishwasher duty, all that kind of stuff. But when it comes down to it, here's the problem with extrinsic motivators is they work great in the short term. They really work great in the short term. Speaking of honeymoon phase, but over the long term, they don't work. That's just, like I said, the research is really clear. 60 years of really good research, studies that have been studied. We have metadata. We have all this stuff. We know that extrinsic motivators do not work over the long term to boost motivation, and they undermine motivation. They undermine creativity. That's a nightmare situation, especially for a teacher. Education should be a long-term creative endeavor. And it's a shame that grades and points and scores and grades and all that sort of stuff are working at odds. Think about what it's like for art and music teachers who have to assess and give a grade for creative output when we know that grades in exchange for creative output undermine creative output and make things less creative and result in kids spending less time and less personal investment in the creative endeavor.
Yeah.
It's a catch 22.
I get that. So if I'm a parent and I listen to this and then I come back to this podcast episode and I say, well, it's been 2 weeks and my 10-year-old, I had this talk, my husband and I sat at the table and we said, you know what, we're going to give you some more responsibility. And now 2 weeks have passed and they come back to the podcast to make sure they got everything right because it's been 2 weeks and that child is not, let's say the responsibility we decided was going to be washing the dishes and dishes aren't getting done. They're piling up. And here I am nagging and getting frustrated every day. What happens? What do I do next?
Yeah, I mean, for you've got to get a little bit creative about and a little bit have more discussions about, why you're doing some of this stuff. And, you know, putting down the blanket statement, okay, your job is now dishes and that's just how it's going to go from here on out. You set some really clear expectations. You explain that this is what we do to help each other out. Like, if they don't do the dishes, then someone else is going to have to do the dishes. And if it means I have to do the dishes, then I won't have time to bake those cupcakes that you need for that school thing tomorrow. And so it's all there's a push and a pull in a family, and we love each other and we support each other. And that's why we do this. Persistence and follow through. I know it's just, it sounds so hard, and it is hard over in the front end, but then over the long term, it really does pay off. And if a kid really and truly is not doing something that you need for them to do, the problem is, and actually, it was funny. I just saw Mel Robbins has this new book out called Let Them.
I
And
heard of it.
I just saw her on a podcast like yesterday. And she was talking about the fact that the minute you try to control someone else, this is not her research. This is a lot of people's research that went into this, that the minute someone does something like nag or try to control, that our immediate response is not, oh, yeah, I'm sorry, let me do that thing. It's no, no. It's like the reason I don't belong to a book club is that if a book gets assigned to me, it's immediately the last book I want to read. Like there are 20 other books I want to read now
It's true.
because you've just told me I
Yeah.
have to read that book. So the more we can sort of support them in ways of thinking that it's their idea, giving them more autonomy around when they do it, like when they do their homework, or um, helping them, give them any kind of locus of control around it. I think of it like, if it's cold outside and your toddler needs to wear a hat, you don't say, hey, toddler, do you want to wear a hat? You say, do you want to wear the red hat or the blue hat? Because you get some buy-in. If the kids aren't doing it, sit all the kids down together and say, here's the problem in this family. And some people are doing their jobs and some people are not doing their jobs. So how do you think we could help each other?
Right.
Don't ever underestimate the power of peer pressure and sibling pressure to help sort of keep things moving. But yeah, and constantly remember, this is parenting is a long-term thing. It's not a linear slope. It doesn't get a little bit better every single day, especially when you're talking about things like executive function skills. It's up and down and up and down and up and down. And that this is all about process and less about end product. Like, is this really about doing the dishes right this very second? Or is this about taking on responsibility, pitching in as a family, making it clear that we all have work to do in order to support each other? And it makes it a little less frustrating. And then my very last piece of advice is this: the more you know about adolescent brain development, and I'm going to go with adolescence here because of that explosive period of growth, the more you know about how the adolescent brain works, the easier it is to take a breath and look right between their eyes and remember that this is the part of the brain that's not hooked up yet, right? All that stuff we want them to be able to do, like remember to do their homework and manage their time and their resources and keep a schedule. That's adulting stuff. And that stuff isn't fully hooked up until the early to mid 20s. And so this whole time we have with kids is all about process. Very little of what we do as parents is about end product. Almost everything we do is process oriented. So, is it frustrating? Yeah. Yeah. Did I just have a conversation with my 21-year-old earlier today about dishes in the sink?
Of course.
Yeah. But has she come, and to answer your earlier question about, not being able to rely on extrinsic motivators and praise, let's look at progress. Let's look at incremental progress. As a writing teacher, writing doesn't get better like all at once. It happens over a very long period of time. So that's why I keep writing samples for my students so that I can say, yeah, I know it's frustrating, but let's look at where you were a year ago. Let's look at where you were 6 months ago. If for fun, let's look at where you were in second grade now that you're in sixth grade. Showing them process, saying things like, you know what, sweetie, I'm really proud of you with sticking with that math homework because like 6 months ago, you would have only lasted 2 or 3 minutes and you've been
Right.
going at it for 10 minutes now.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of you for that. Pointing out incremental progress to them because they don't, even with us, we don't have a great sense of, we just get used to things as they are. We don't think a lot about how far we've come, which is why it's really great to look back at stuff you've done in the past and realize, oh, I have gotten better at that. I am better at that. Look at where my kid is now. It's really frustrating and I just want to whack them. But let's look at where they were 6 months ago or a year ago.
Exactly.
Could they have done the things they're doing today 6 months ago? No. So yay us.
Yeah.
We're doing a great job.
We forget that. We just were so focused on getting the better grade and getting better at whatever we're doing that we forget that they've come a long way. And I love that you're saying that. We need to kind of not celebrate it, but mention it and bring it up and keep reminding them that there is progress. And the failure too, right? So I think about that child that you said, like sometimes my kids would be like, I don't want to wear a hat. okay, then don't wear one. And then guess what? 10
Yeah.
minutes later, they come in and be like, it's cold. Give me
Yeah.
my hat. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's really hard as a parent. It's like, just put your hat on, or, you need to wear boots, not, don't put your running shoes on. And you argue with them and argue. And they're like, I want to wear my shoes. You know what? Go outside with your shoes. And then they get the snow inside and then they cry and then it's cold. And
Yeah.
guess what? They don't ask about it.
During the period that we decided it was time to stop packing for our kids, we went on a weekend trip to Montreal, and it was below zero, and our youngest did not have a coat.
Uh,
And that sucked.
yeah,
It was
no kidding.
awful.
Yeah.
She was cold.
Yeah.
She
I
was
could only
really
imagine.
cold, and it limited some of the things that we could do. But have we talked about that 3,000 times since then? And did that change her ability to plan? Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. It makes sense. And to kind of finish off our conversation, I think that most of the conversations I've had with people always come back to the parent doing the work on themselves first. Would you see it that way as well? Because I'm thinking about the conversation I had with teachers yesterday, and they said that when I told them, like, how can you let them fail given that locker problem? And they said, even if, so there were 60 teachers in front of me, and they said, even if we would do that, we would probably hear from the parents. We would probably get in trouble somehow, or they'd be disappointed that we let their child not be able to take notes during the class because they didn't bring their pencil for the 400th time that they didn't bring a pencil in class. So I feel like we do have to kind of end this conversation with the reflections we need to think of as parents, and in terms of how we think of failure, because I've met so many parents that themselves, whether it's work, parenting, just looking like everything is perfect in their home, they don't want to fail.
Yeah. There's also an issue of mutual respect. I used to have this conversation even in middle school with my students where I say, I get very little time with you during the day, and I have a lesson plan, and there's a certain amount of learning that we all get to do together. And when you have to go away, you're taking away from that time. I come to our class prepared. I'm ready to start the minute everyone walks in the door. And so it's a matter of mutual respect. If you're not prepared when you walk in the door, then you're telling me that you don't respect my time. If I were to not show up to class on time, or if I were to not be ready when you guys walk in, then what I'm saying is I don't respect you enough to be prepared. So having these kind of, we're back to pro-social skills and social emotional learning and all that kind of stuff. Having the ability to like flip the perspective can often be really helpful when we're talking to kids about things like that.
Yeah, I get that. It's there's a lot of work for us to do. But again, I appreciated your book so much. I just loved the idea of kind of looking at it from a different perspective in terms of what am I doing with my kids, and am I taking a little moment of, an opportunity of learning away from them without even realizing. And now they make a mess, they have to clean it up themselves. And even if they spread the milk all over the wooden floor, then I have to step back and just tell them, well, do you think it's sticky? What else can we do? My kids are young. They're
Well,
5,
yeah.
7, and 9, but the 5-year-old now cleans his own mess. And it's I
Yeah.
mean, I read your book right before the holidays, and it's just been a few weeks, and he cleans. He doesn't say like, "Oops, drop my milk," and then just waits there. He'll clean it up. And so it's made a big difference.
There yeah, there have been a few moments. We don't, like I said before, we don't often get the rewards for the efforts that we're making right in that moment. But I remember I took my eldest to get his driver's license, and we got there and he was sitting down and filling out all the forms, and next to us was a mother and her daughter, and the daughter was on her phone, and the mother was filling out the forms, asking the daughter some details that she needed to fill out the forms. And my kid looked at me like, what is going on there? And, you end up in a situation where a kid doesn't even know how to fill forms, doesn't know, basic information about themselves. I run across kids all the time who don't know their zip code, or don't know where they live, or don't know the name of their doctor and that kind of stuff. And, we can't wait until I think a lot of parents think they'll magically just sort of get it at 18, and that's just not how that works. And sometimes we have to plan for it. A very favorite one that I've ever done, I realized I take my kids on work trips with me a lot just because it's great opportunities to do stuff with them. And I realized at a certain point that I was dragging them through airports, and that not explaining sort of why we're doing all these weird things, like you need ID here, but not there. And then you need your boarding pass, but not. So, what you can do is you can fudge the time you need to get at the airport and get there just a whole hour early, just plan for like a whole hour early, and walk in through the doors and say, okay, what do we do? and give your kid the opportunity. Like you're there to help them. You haven't run away, you haven't abandoned them. But like, do you want their first time figuring out how to get through an airport by themselves when they're actually by themselves? Or would you prefer that they figure it out while they have you there to support them, and not like give them the answers, but say, well, let's think it through. What things might you need at each stop of the way going through this? And man, I'm glad I did that. because I have kids who, now obviously travel by themselves, and I don't know when I assumed they were going to learn that, if not in an actual opportunity to learn that.
I'm going to confess, as an adult, I just learned it like 3, 4 years ago. I never traveled. And when I walked in the first time, I was like, wait a second, I've always followed my husband because I like being the person that just, I didn't have to think. And so I confess, I was one of those people. All of us want our kids to be resilient, and we all want our kids to be autonomous. But if we continue on this path of doing it all for them, they will not be autonomous.
Oh, we're already hearing that from I hear from college professors, I hear from bosses, I hear from people who employ younger people constantly, how unbelievably horrified they are with the lack of communication skills, the lack of, just general life competence. And yeah, I'm really worried for those kids.
Yeah. So we need to reevaluate how we're doing that in our home. And I think that this conversation is going to help a lot of parents kind of take some notes and see where they can, where there's room for improvement in their house.
Can I give you resources if they want
Of
more
course.
specifics?
Yes, please.
So I was told, so Gift of Failure talks people tend to come to. It's like, yay, it was a best-selling book, all that sort of stuff. But it was hard for me to get people to come to my substance use prevention talks because it's a scary topic.
Of course.
So
I
a
get that.
friend of mine recommended, well, since you don't mind making videos, why don't you make bite-sized chunks of go through both books? So there are 400 videos
Oh,
on my
wow.
website. If you
Yes.
go to jessicalahey.com,
Hmm.
under videos, there's like 200 over 200 addiction inoculation videos. They're 90 seconds long. They're Instagram reel length. And then for Gift of Failure, there's about 200 or so, a little under 200. And it gets really granular in all of these topics. So if you have more questions about any of these topics, there's a bajillion videos over there that you can go to.
Thank you. And where else can people learn from you? I know you have an Instagram account. Is that your personal one or business?
Yeah, so I have jessicalahey.com. Everything is always there. And my newsletter is jesslahey.substack.com. And that's where I write about sort of the stuff I'm currently researching, speaking events, where I'll be, that kind of stuff. And for the writers in your audience, I also happen to host a podcast called the #AmWriting Podcast with 3 other authors, all best-selling authors. So if you're interested in writing and interested in, the publishing industry and stuff like that, you can go, and that's at Substack as well. It's actually anywhere you get podcasts, #AmWriting.
I will put the links to all of those in the show notes because I want everybody to learn more from you and to connect with you. And if you're okay with it, your next book is my next book to read. And so maybe we can have you back later this season or this year.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. I was just making some videos for, I was at a school this past week and kids asked me questions. It was a substance use prevention talk. And kids asked me the best questions. They asked me amazing questions. And so I'm currently today actually making a bunch of videos to answer their questions as well. So
I absolutely love that. Thank you for everything that you do and for the research that you put into your books. The quality is outstanding. Such a good read and an important resource. So thanks again, Jessica.
thank you so much.